Hello and welcome to the CBB Supershow. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Deuce85, and we're coming to you live on the FTN Network. If you are checking out this show for the first time, I want to thank you. Perhaps you could show us some support by hitting that like button there. It is such a huge help. I used to think, begging for likes and all that was pretty lame, but I cannot even begin to tell you how much I appreciate, and the FTN Network appreciates you taking a second to slap that like button around. If you are a continued viewer of the show and a supporter, please continue to do so. Sharing it as well on your socials and just interacting. Even if you just stop by, drop a comment and bounce, it is a huge, huge, huge thing. And I am definitely very happy with how things are going over this near decade of doing the show, from blog talk radio to the now on YouTube and in between. Very fun. I absolutely love college basketball. How could you not love college sports in general? It's only December. We're seeing buzzer beaters galore. We're seeing all kinds of craziness, parity. Number one goes down, undefeateds go down. It is just an amazing sport to support and pay attention to. A lot going on this weekend, though. We have more college football to talk about this weekend. I have a slate coming out tomorrow, breakdown for that, and the main slate for college basketball. Jake Huchek and I did a full slate breakdown of the college football slate, CFB Supershow, here on YouTube. Make sure you're checking that out for that breakdown. Lots of content coming. The betting team is red hot. Our guy, the chief content officer and lead, Mike Randall, will be doing his betting show tomorrow morning. You'll want to make sure you tune into that. He is on a quest to continue crushing it. He is up a ton of units, and he is just a really, really sharp guy. Sometimes he makes some questionable calls about some of my teams, but you know what? Overall, he's pretty much smarter than me, and he's absolutely wrecking it. And of course, our prop guru, Mike Kutry, who is just unbelievable when it comes to prop betting. The dude is a true messiah in every sense of the word. Really happy to be part of this team. Really happy to see the Discord with some green screens in it tonight. We are going to continue crushing it and making things happen. We still have three and a half months left. It is a long season, plenty of opportunities to make some money, plenty of opportunities to have some fun and really just get acclimated with the teams, the conferences, the staff, the players, everything. Because once we get closer to March, that is when the influx of casual players and people who are looking for something to do with all that NFL and NBA money. And why not? What better way to welcome them into the fold by slapping them around and taking that hard-earned NFL money for ourselves? All right, we're going to talk about the 7-game slate, which we do here if this is your first time. We break things down in a game-by-game format, so I will be talking about each and every game, any of my favorite plays, any game usage rates, game scripts, like tempo, all that stuff, any and all pertinent information that you'll need to properly tackle these games. Also talk a little bit about PrizePicks, core plays, give you a core at the end of the show to build around for all formats, and then also any betting opportunities that come through for myself. Sometimes I will drop some props, also anything total-wise, or just lines that look a little bit peculiar or weird, something that we can take advantage of. We will do so. All right, first game on the slate that we are going to talk about, and this is an all-day affair. Starts at 9 a.m. Pacific, moves all the way on till that last game between UConn and St. John's, which takes place at 5 p.m. Pacific. So, ordinarily we would have a split slate, early main night on Saturdays, but it is, of course, the holiday season. We're not going to have a whole hell of a lot of games anyways. It's Christmas Eve, there will be the finals and consolation rounds of the Diamond Head Classic tournament that's taking place in Hawaii, but that's pretty much it. It's going to be a 4-game slate, and then we have Christmas Day off, of course, so there is really not a lot of games available. So I'm glad that they actually morphed this into an all-day slate, makes it kind of fun, and really rewards those who grind news throughout the entire way. All right, Butler versus Providence. Two of the Big East teams that I'm liking quite a bit. The Big East, they seem rather vulnerable, right? There is a lot of uncertainty when it comes with these teams, but we did see Marquette bounce back from a tough loss against Providence the other night. They took care of business against a pretty porous Georgetown team, beating them by 30. So a real nice pop back for them. Now Providence, coming off of the Marquette win, goes up against a better than you probably realized Butler team. And Providence is really playing well under Kim English. They're currently 10-2. Last loss was against Oklahoma back in the beginning of the month. They have an overtime loss against Kansas State, but quality wins over Wisconsin, Marquette, Rhode Island, and a really poor Georgia team. But still, a win over a P5 team is always a good thing. Providence currently 8th in defensive efficiency, and that has been a major key for Kim English and his team. They are forcing a ton of turnovers, and they have been very, very vicious when it comes to perimeter defense, and they are also doing a pretty damn good job on the interior, blocking shots and just generally making life difficult for their opponents. The KenPom projection on this one is 74-69 in favor of Providence. Now they play at the 116th fastest tempo. On the Butler side, they are 165th. Defensive efficiency in the right around the 90-91 range. They are also 10-2. Earlier season losses against Michigan State, in which they were totally outmatched, and then a tough loss against Florida Atlantic on the neutral floor, where they actually nearly won that and pushed them pretty well. Quality wins over Penn State, Texas Tech, which was an overtime win, which they scored 103 points, if you can believe that, Boise State, Georgetown, and Cal. I like this Butler team a lot, and it's not just because my man Posh Alexander is on the squad, although that certainly helps. Butler right now, 6.5-point dogs, a total of a 141.5. I think I saw earlier, or at least Rob, our resident Butler super fan, one of my friends at How the Pros Do It on Twitter, give him a hard time, but I like the guy. I would never admit it to him in his face. He doesn't watch the show anymore, I don't think, but he's a good dude. Butler super fan. I think he mentioned something about 5.5. So that potentially might have moved. 6.5. I definitely like that. I know Providence has been nails, but I do think this Butler team has the chops to kind of hang around, especially if a guy like Pierre Brooks is scoring and Posh is doing his best to negate some of the outside scoring that Providence gets from Ticket Gaines and Devin Carter, who's been an absolute machine so far this year. Starting with the Providence roster, it does begin with Devin Carter, who has just, I think over the last couple of years, I think we all saw those flashes, thought he had a chance to be a really good basketball player, right? But the way he's playing this year as a total superstar, I'm pretty sure that most people outside of his direct family, or maybe some in the program, did not see this coming. Overall, a lot of people coming into it, Bryce Hopkins going to have this player of the year type of season. He's going to be absolutely amazing. And he's had some great games. Do not get me wrong. But overall, I feel like Devin Carter has impacted things. And as he goes, this team will go. Looking at the Providence rates throughout on their top players, Bryce Hopkins does lead the team in usage at 27.1%, has a shot rate of 27%, a combined rebounding rate of 27%, and he's drawing over 6 fouls per 40. He's done an excellent job keeping his fouls in check. One thing that he's struggling with, and he's still chucking those threes, is his actual three-point shooting. He is 21% from long range. Now, in conference play last year, he was making 42% of his threes, which is third best in the Big East. Definitely needs to find his three-point shooting to increase his versatility. Without it, he is not as efficient. And some of these games that we've seen, he's not hitting his ceiling, and it's pretty tough. His price has come down a little bit, though, in the low 8K range, which does make him playable for sure. Is playing 83.5% of the available minutes. He is definitely going to be on the court a lot. Now, I would prefer Carter for 300 more myself, but I think majority of the field would also prefer Carter over Hopkins, although he does come with guard forward eligibility, and he is a pretty big name. Most people know early on in the season he was chalk like the first 3 or 4 games of the season. Kind of backed off of him now, but 8.2 is a really nice price for him and something that he has to be considered since Butler team. Carter at 8.5, though, he is definitely the guy. He has a 25% usage rate, a 39% rate from beyond the arc this year on 69 attempts, absolutely chucking, and a block rate of 4%. A very, very talented guard, 19% assist rate, a defensive rebounding rate of 22.4%, which is actually the highest on the team, more so than Josh Orduro, if you can believe that. So Carter is just a very safe option. Similar to Tyler Kolek when we talked about him today, those strong peripherals make him such a safe option. If he's actually scoring as well and hitting his threes, it makes him like, a super ceiling option. I know Terry Shannon was the guy tonight that actually broke the ceiling, but Kolek himself, pushing 40 was certainly fine. I see Carter having that ability here to hit 40, but he's going to have the great Posh Alexander defending him, so that is going to be a problem. Overall, Carter is just a middling play for me. I don't think I necessarily have to pay up for him at 8.5, but Butler games have been super fantasy friendly this year, and I certainly want exposure to some of these guys in this game. Josh Oduro at 7.3. I think he has a chance to be really good here against his Butler front court. Now, Butler has some bodies in the front court that can definitely cause trouble, create some foul issues, get on the glass, but for the most part, I think what's going to end up happening is Oduro will just get a guy like Jalen Thomas in foul trouble. Jamil Telfort's a little undersized to be trying to deal with him. Andre Screen is their 7-footer, but he doesn't play a lot of minutes. He also has a high foul rate. I think what ultimately ends up happening here is Butler having to go with a little bit of a smaller lineup out of foul trouble issues, and not out of want, but more out of necessity, because they're not going to have those guys available, and which does lead me to think Josh Oduro is going to be one of the sneakier options in this game. 7.3 is not the greatest price in the world, but forward typically a position that's harder for us to fill. And I think he does have that big game, big slate breaking upside in this particular matchup. The rest of the starting 5, Ticket Gaines, who sits there at 5.1, relatively strong price for him. His logs are all messed up because his Devontae Gaines, like DK still hasn't figured that out. It's a little bit of annoying because I don't think he has live stats scoring, which to me isn't a big deal. Like, I don't look at the DK scoring anyways. I'm the Mr. Superstitious, so I'll check ownership, but I won't go through and like look at the scoring. I'll watch games and box scores or whatever. So that part doesn't matter to me, but a lot of people will be worrying like, hey, Devontae's playing, he's not getting any points, what's the deal? And it just has to do with that. So you'll see there's like no logs available on DK for Ticket Gaines, but he is playing, rest assured. He is out there playing, 30 plus minutes and is a starter. Did score 18 actual points, hit 5 threes in his last game against Marquette. So at 5.1, he's certainly got to be in consideration. And then you have Jaden Pierre sitting there at 4.8, playing roughly 25 minutes. He had some big game ability because of his three-point shooting as well, but if the threes aren't falling, he simply doesn't have the upside. But sub 5K starter playing over 20 minutes, definitely have to give him consideration. You have the freshman Garwi Duell, who is a future NBA prospect. Hasn't really looked the part just yet. He's super raw, but he's only 4.2. If you're making multiple GPP lineups, large field stuff, and you need a home run hitter, Garwi Duell is somebody who could potentially do that. Did play 33 minutes in a spot start 2 games ago, 23 off the bench against Marquette. Did hit 15 fantasy points, only sits at 4.2K. You could certainly do worse there. On the Butler side, my man Posh Alexander is priced up to 7.5. It's a little tough even for me. I generally like to get him in that mid 6K range. I did use him against Georgetown because who wouldn't, even at 7K, knew he was going to rack up steals. He did. He had racked up the assists. Points were about what he normally scores, right around 11 to 12. Hit nearly 40 fantasy points. That is the 4th time in the last 5 games he has exceeded 31 fantasy points per DK scoring. So he's definitely had the production to warrant this 7.5 price, but I'm a little bit hesitant because we're in the opposite of Cam Thomas realm here. Like at this price, people were worried because Cam, he's so reliant on his scoring ability. He's not going to give you any peripherals. If he doesn't score 30 real, what are you going to do? Posh is kind of the opposite. Like, we know he's going to get steals. We know he's going to get assists. Might he get some rebounds here? Probably not going to be the level of what we saw against Texas Tech or Buffalo, not against this Friars team, at least in my opinion. And he's probably not going to score 20 plus real points. So we're going to have to deal with 6 to 10, maybe 11, 12 real points. How many steals and assists on top of that he's going to go? That 7-5 is just taking away some of that ceiling there. Now, he had a triple-double against Texas Tech. It did take overtime, and he only had 10 real points, hitting 50. So it's not as if he has to score a bunch, but we also can't sit here and expect a triple-double. At the end of the day, I love Posh Alexander. I think there are very few people in this industry who are bigger fans of him than I am. Not trying to be cocky. That's just, I love the kid. Got his merchandise. I'm just a big fan of Posh. But even for me, I think 7-5 in this spot against Providence is probably a little bit too high. Same could be said for Jameel Telford, who sits there at 7-4. I think that's just a price at this point that I'm not that interested in. He's been super chalky each and every slate. Maybe that continues here. I don't particularly love the spot. He does have a 26.5% shot rate, which does lead the team, shooting 35% from long range, playing a bunch of minutes, has that forward eligibility, plays all over the place, can guard multiple positions. So I get why Telford continues to show up as chalk, but that is somebody that I would prefer to be a little underweight compared to the rest of the field. Pierre Brooks, 6'7". I don't love that price. We need to see him go down a little bit lower. High shot rate, takes a ton of threes, can score in bunches, but he can also go ice cold, averaging almost 17 points per game. I just need to see his price get down in that low 6K range before you really start to consider him again. But he is an X factor, and he is somebody I think that a lot of people will gloss over. If you want exposure to a game that has overtime potential and has sneaky high scoring potential between these two, Pierre Brooks is the guy that I would be considering. That's especially interesting when you consider the fact that DJ Davis did suffer an injury in their last game against Georgetown, didn't return. It's being called a sprained ankle, and he is considered highly questionable. I would personally be shocked if he didn't try to play, but I don't know how effective he'll actually be, especially going up against Providence, and an ankle injury is nothing to mess with. So there is a very solid potential that he does not play. I think what ends up happening is he plays, but he's ineffective and plays less minutes, which just mucks up everything. If he doesn't, then you have the chance for Landon Moore, who I don't really like. Watching their game the other day, he was totally overmatched even against Georgetown. Or fan favorite Finley Bizjack, who is a very high energy guy. I know it's very taboo to say that sometimes and cliche. This guy's got a high motor. But at 3'6", if he were to maybe jump into the starting lineup, I have interest because he's fearless. He's not got the strength, experience to kind of keep up in this game, but he's got moxie, and sometimes that's all it takes. So I'm on the lookout there. Connor Turnbull missed the last game as well. That led to Andre Screen seeing a spike in minutes. He is a high fantasy point per minute player. They are going to need to see some additional time out of him to deal with this Providence front court. But again, I think foul trouble is going to dog him. And we're not getting a very good discount at this point at 4.9. That's a little bit too rich for my blood. If he was down there in like the 3.6, 3.9, area, I think we could kind of start to talk about, hey, maybe we can get away with using this guy in a main lineup, but not in almost 5K. There's not enough upside there and probably not enough minutes. Hey, what's up, Aaron? Hey, Merry Christmas, my man. Good seeing you. Good seeing you. Appreciate you jumping on, watching us live as we do our thing. Next game here, Mississippi State versus Rutgers. There's a lot of games on this slate that are kind of just like real life good basketball games to watch, I suppose. And I know saying that is also very cliched, being corny for the holiday here. But fantasy wise, it might not get any uglier than this between these two teams here. It is a total of 132, which is, not quite Virginia low, but it's not great. Mississippi State 3-point favorites. And I have to say, there are several teams that have disappointed me this year. And not that I'm like fans of those teams. I'm like, man, I can't believe they're not good. It's more so like I expected certain players on these certain teams to be really good. St. Mary's with my man Aiden, Mahoney, who has fallen off of the cliff since game 2 of the season. They're also not a very great team. Rutgers, who is got a 7-3 record here. But man, I got to tell you, I'm super disappointed, shocked, and borderline appalled that Derek Simpson has not ascended in year 2 to a level that I really expected him to. He's coming into this matchup priced at a level at 5-3 where the beginning of the season, not knowing what we know now, if you would have said, hey, in right around late December, Rutgers is going to be on a slate, who do you like? I would obviously be saying Derek Simpson. And then you tell me 5-3 is going to be his price point. I'm going to be like, wow, that's a gift. But he's really not coming through. He's seeing long stretches on the bench. He hasn't started the last 2 games, although he did play 26 minutes off the bench against LIU in a blowout win. He actually had one of his better games of the month, but I don't see how we can possibly use him in anything beyond a GBP lineup. And even that might be tough because he hasn't really shown us the upside. So you're using him in GBP, and even if he has a good game, we're probably looking at a 4.5, maybe 5x number on a good day. So it is very difficult for me to get excited about Simpson. I had to learn that lesson early on because he was an auto plug and play to me. I know even at 6K, like I'm playing Simpson. And he had a nice game against Howard, really nice. And then he just began to fall off the face of the earth and has not played well since. But this price point is definitely a buy low opportunity. You have that testicular fortitude. You don't mind taking some risks. Maybe we look at Derek Simpson here. He would definitely have to start, though, for me to seriously consider using him. The rest of the Rutgers group and who they used as the 5 starters in that LIU game, Mawat Mag, who's now back, Noah Fernandez, Jamichael Davis, the freshman who has been doing what I expected Derek Simpson to do, so that's interesting enough, Clifford Omarui, and Andre Hyatt. Now, Omarui has been super expensive, but his price has started to come down to a manageable level. Paying almost 9.5K for Omarui is just way too crazy for me. He's had some really big explosion games and warranted those prices, no doubt. But we've seen in the past throughout his career, sometimes the guards can't make an entry pass, or sometimes they just forget he's there, and he has to get all of his shot attempts off of putbacks. That hasn't been the case as much this year, and they've leaned on him a lot more, which is really honestly helping them, and it's created a situation where he's putting up huge numbers. 25 real points against LIU. Like, that's just something we never saw last year. 8-1 is a much more reasonable price. You're talking about a Mississippi State front court that has been missing Tolu Smith. Without him, there is talk of him returning soon. They didn't expect him until deep January. Now there's talk of him maybe returning sooner. We'll see. But looking at the rest of this front court, Jimmy Bell is probably going to, have some rough times trying to deal with Omarui. This could be a spot where he looks pretty good and has a nice return at that 8-1 price tag. An ugly, slower pace game, mucking it up, grabbing rebounds, blocking shots. That's where Omo really kind of thrives anyways. And this is going to be a game style that really fits his play style. Other guys on the team, Jamichael Davis at 5'2", back-to-back games over 25 DK points, 23, 32, and 29 minutes in each of his last 3. Yeah, that one of those was against LIU, but he also had one against Wake Forest, which we know their defense isn't great, and once against Seton Hall. Did also play 19 minutes off the bench against Illinois. They didn't do well in that game overall, but his possessions were pretty decent, and he played better than expected defense, which I think is ultimately why he's begun to get these extra minutes and the starting spot. Would have liked to, maybe get him in the 4K range, but he was priced up over 6K at one point when DK's pricing was totally out of whack. Now he's at a level at 5'2", where he's definitely justifiable as a starter and somebody that we can use. He's even kind of usurped Gavin Griffiths to a degree in playability, and somebody that they're relying on a little bit more. Mawat Mag at 4'8" as a value forward. Again, there's not enough guys in the Mississippi State front court right now to deal with all of these kind of rugged front court options that Rutgers has. I do like Mag as a value, up 800 since he was last time on the slate. Appears to be healthy, no residual signs of the knee issue, has played over 20 minutes in each of his 2 games played. Definitely on the radar in our player pool for main team status here in all formats. I like him quite a bit. I think those minutes are going to continue to come, especially if you want that discount from Omar Rui. He makes a lot of sense. Mississippi State side, they have been a really ugly team. Defensively, though, they are borderline elite under Chris Jans. They have a really puzzling loss to Southern, a loss against Georgia Tech that they probably shouldn't have, but otherwise they're 9-2 and just beating the teams that they should. An impressive win over Northwestern and Tulane. Tulane's ending up being pretty lousy, unfortunately. And North Texas, beatdown of North Texas by almost 20 points. An impressive undressing of them for sure. This is all without Tolu Smith. Just imagine how good they're going to be when he returns. As it stands right now, the starting group that they will typically run and have is Cameron Matthews, DJ Jeffries, Deshaun Davis, Shaquille Moore, and Jimmy Bell. They're still bringing the freshman Josh Hubbard off the bench, where he's continuing to operate in a high usage volume scorer role. Kashawn Murphy, Sean Jones also off the bench there. And Trey Fort, who has kind of pulled on from being a 25-minute guy to non-existent in the blink of an eye. Prices here are all relatively high. 7.6 for Cam Matthews. As good as he's been, expecting him to pop 50s is really kind of unrealistic. Paying 7.6 for him is also fairly unrealistic in my eyes. I'm not looking to pay that. He does have the forward instead of guard eligibility there, coming off a 50 with 9 real points. That just shows you 5 steals, 3 blocks, 12 rebounds, 7 assists. Ungodly line against North Texas. That was a rough, slower physical game. This is exactly a rerun of that. Might people chase Cam Matthews? Probably, but I'm not going to be one of them. Always like my guy Josh Hubbard. 6'3" is probably a price I'll stay away from. Not starting, capped at about 25 minutes. He needs to usurp Deshaun Davis, get Deshaun Davis out of here and let Hubbard play 35 minutes a game. Let's not be Bruce Pearl here, Chris. Davis still kicking. 5'2" is actually a pretty decent price for him. There's no upside, but 4X is an inevitability. Playing 28 to 29 minutes. Don't hate it. We have seen heavy ownership on Shaquille Moore. He's 4'4", was priced at 4.3 going against North Texas. It wasn't a great spot for him whatsoever. He only delivered 10 fantasy points. And I think there's another spot where it's kind of hard to justify using him. Price-wise, yes. But if you are factoring in matchup at all and, the way that this game's going to play out, I don't really see a lot of routes for him to pay off. He's not taking a high volume of shots, 5, 5-3, 5-4. So it's not as if we can rely on him to go out there and start chucking. And what's he going to do on the glass? Not a lot. He's not going to add anything in the stocks categories, maybe a few random assists here or there, but I just don't see that him paying off this 6.6 price if this 4.4 price at a very high clip. So that is another piece of relative chalk, or at least what I project to be somewhat chalky, that I'm just not that interested in. Could I eat my words later? Sure. But I mean, it's just a sound logic to fade him at high ownership here, even at 4.4. Sometimes you can't mindlessly just play a guy because he's cheap. There has to be other aspects you look at here for it to make sense. All right, next game, Seton Hall. I've got a Big East contest versus Xavier. This is definitely one we're going to want to utilize. Xavier games are always going to be fun, I think, and there's going to be a lot of fantasy goodness. We just saw with St. John's. We were all over Joel Soriano, had the monster second half, but Naheem Aline went off. Chris Ledlam went off. There was foul trouble for Dennis Jenkins, which allowed Naheem Aline to play more and go off. But this is a spot where Xavier's just susceptible to giving up a ton of fantasy goodness. Now, the total is 147. I do think the over is in play, even with the Seton Hall offense being inept at times. Xavier is 4-point favorites as well. I do like a potential bet there on Seton Hall at +4. However, Seton Hall may be a little bit of a hangover after a victory over UConn by 15 which nobody could say with any honesty that they saw that coming. Shaheen Holloway has them at 8-4. Tough losses to USC, Iowa, and Baylor. Also Rutgers, but they've won 3 straight over Monmouth, Missouri, who's turning out to be a horrible team, and UConn. Ken Palm does have this 76-71 in favor of X, and it is a road game for Seton Hall. The big decision usually on Seton Hall slates is, do you want to roster Kadary Richmond? Now, we've gotten away with fading him for a long time, and I know the UConn game, he was like unbelievable, but the good news was nobody really rostered him, so it didn't hurt us. Typically, he's been pretty chalky around this price that he is right now, regardless of matchup, but we saw against Missouri, Monmouth, and the Baylor game, he carried pretty heavy ownership. Turnovers is a big issue with Kadary, but on DK scoring, it really doesn't hurt you that much. 5-6 turnovers, whatever. Rates wise, he's clearly, obviously, the highest usage rate on the team at 27%, highest shot rate at 26%, only 18% from long range on 17 attempts. So that part of his game is just not working out. Does have a 30% assist rate, 4.5% steal rate, drawing 5 fouls per 40, making things happen. At his best, we're looking at a 15, 5-5 type stat line. At his worst, we're talking about, rock bottom 18 fantasy points, maybe even less. I am curious to see what that ends up being. This is a matchup against a Xavier team that can be bullied around, and his style of play can definitely wreak havoc. So I am probably 50-50 on if I want to roster Richmond in my main just yet, but I'll certainly have exposure. The rest of Seton Hall, I'd say, are either priced right or they are a little bit over. Dre Davis at 6'8", that to me is a little bit too high. He's been really good. If you're just looking at game logs, you're going to see a very productive player. Rebounding numbers should be pretty solid for him. The Xavier front court was the reason why we were so heavy on Soriano. There's just non-existent. Without Fremantle, and Hunter, there's just nobody in the front court really to stand tall. Abu Osman is there, but he is only one guy. He is a heavy fouler, and he's not going to give you 35 plus minutes. There's going to be a big chunk of time where he's not on the floor, and front court players are just going to wreak havoc. So Davis does have upside there. Jaden Bediako, probably my preferred option there at 6'5". He has really acclimated well to the Shaheen Holloway system. Playing solid minutes, went from being relatively lost the first few games to now being one of their primary guys. He is rebounding at a elite rate right now. Second highest offensive rebounding rate in the country, a combined rate of 39%, block rate over 8.5%, and his usage rate has now eclipsed 20. So there's more and more good things happening for Bediako. I do like him quite a bit here, as I said, at 6'5". Avoiding foul trouble, crucial, but if he does, I see no reason why he can't hit 30-plus fantasy points in this spot. Alamir Dawes at 5'6". It's technically that range that I like to roster one or two guys. He had that big game against Missouri, took his under 13.5 points prop against UConn because it felt pretty easy. Gave me a scare there, but it did hit at 11. Generally going to be really reliant on his scoring. Might he do well against Xavier here? Yes. I think what I'll be doing is staying away from his props in this one because I could see him going either way. As an overall main team play, I think that's never going to be the case unless he slips below 5K. Then we're talking about a different story. But as it stands right now, he's more of just a alt team build for me. I do want to see the youngster Isaiah Coleman play more. We saw him against Monmouth really play well, earn some additional minutes, but it hasn't leveled off yet. He's also very raw as a freshman, so you really can't use him too much in anything beyond maybe some alt builds. But at 3.7, he obviously has mega talent, and he's somebody worth monitoring here throughout. On the Xavier side, Desmond Cloud, man, what a game against St. John's. He was awesome. And he's rebounding so well for a guy his size. 21, 12, and 3 against St. John's in that loss. 40 fantasy points, back-to-back games of 36. We were getting him for free at the beginning of the year. His price has been up. Nobody's been rostering him at all the last month of the season, the last month pretty much. I do know that 7.5 is a price that could really burn you quite a bit, but looking at what he can give you and what he delivers, he's not one-dimensional, which I'm not trying to be negative. But he's not one-dimensional, kind of like Quincy Olivari is. Olivari's really, going to be scoring reliant, and he does it well. Davion McKnight has kind of turned himself into more of a facilitator. He can score as well, but he's just basically setting the table for guys, and he's playing really well on the perimeter on ball defense. But Cloud just does a little bit of everything. He rebounds, he can score, he can, run the offense. I really like him this year. He's playing 82.7% of the minutes. He has a usage rate above 25% now. His assist rate, 23%. He is only shooting 23% from long range, but he has taken 43 attempts, so it hasn't stopped him from firing, drawing almost 6 fouls per 40. And like I said, he's rebounding pretty well for a guy who is a bigger guard, but definitely not somebody at like, a $190 that should be grabbing 12 rebounds against opposing front courts, but he is. So I really like that aspect and think that he has a shot here against Seton Hall to have another big game. It'll feel like a chase for sure, but you're looking at all of the Xavier main 3 guards, 6'9" or above. So it's kind of a pick your poison situation. I do think you want to take one, and I think I want the most complete player of those 3, which is Desmond Cloud. Only other real option is Abu Osman. Again, foul trouble is usually dogging him, so paying almost $7K is a bit risky. He did have 31 against a tough Cincinnati front court in only 24 minutes, so he is capable, but this is a very high price at 6'8". I think that it's more of a GPP look. We can probably get away from it. Lazar Djokovic has been starting. He's 3-5, 20, 21, and 17 minutes. Picked up 2 fouls in the first 35 seconds in that St. John's game. Did end up coming back and playing, but it got him out of his rhythm. 3-5. You're not going to get a lot out of him. Anytime you play those sub 4K options, you're putting yourself at risk to a degree. So you know what you're going to get with Lazar. It's kind of a emergency break this case in a, if only there's a fire and you really have a pay up on this slate that, hey, I got to play Lazar because I have to get Joel Soriano in there, which might be the case at 10-1. It's a high price, but he's been awesome. Tristan Newton at 9-4. He's been awesome. David Jones at 9-2. He's been incredible. Caleb Love at 9K against FAU. I don't think so, but there is some really good pay-ups here. So if you feel you got to throw one spot away to get one of those 3, I don't hate the idea. It hasn't worked very well, but I don't hate the idea. Arizona versus FAU. Speaking of which, how are we not going to get Ole Miss Southern Mississippi on the slate? Like Southern Mississippi was on the slate all the time 2 years ago, and we can't even get one slate with them on it for some reason. Arizona 6.5 point favorites, 162 total. That's kind of an eye opener. Looking at a Florida Atlantic game with a total over 160. To me, Florida Atlantic, really in a borderline elite tier defense. They're top 35 in the country in that category. Offensive efficiency through the roof. They do play at the 142nd fastest tempo, but generally I just don't think of them as this like high scoring team or giving up all these points. But when you go through and look at similar matchups, it has been the case. The Illinois game on a neutral court, 98-89. That was like way above what I expected it to get to. They did score 84 against a tough Virginia Tech team, 96 against Texas A&M, which is super impressive, 91 against Butler. Bryant, they only scored 52 for some reason. I don't know what that game was about. One of their 2 losses, Illinois and Bryant. They dropped 94 on a horrific FIU team, and then St. Bonaventure on the neutral in their most recent game, which was last Saturday. They were about 64-54 in that game. That's what I normally think of when I think of Florida Atlantic. But when you look at their total body of work in the non-con, they have been scoring at a high rate, and they are cooking in terms of DFS. The only problem is they remain a uber deep team with a mentality of we don't care who scores, open man or hot guy is going to get the rock. And that makes it hard to really justify using them. They're also going into a game against Arizona, 5th fastest tempo in the country. They're going to be trying to run them out of the gym here. 2nd best defense in the country per Ken Baum, 6th best offense. Like this Arizona team under Tommy Lloyd is the real deal. You throw out that close loss against Purdue, which, ultimately they didn't look as good as the score shows, 92-84. They looked like they probably should have lost by more. to be honest. But just coming off that win against Alabama, an undressing of a decent Wisconsin team, beating Michigan State, beating Duke, this Arizona team is the real deal. But I just don't know how much of this game I want to get into. Like I said, on the FAU side, you're usually deciding between Elijah Martin and John L. Davis if you are using somebody from this team. But pegging which one it's going to be is tough because they generally don't go off together. Now, lately, John L. Davis has been absolutely crushing. 34 plus fantasy points in 4 straight games. And that's against the likes of Illinois, St. Bonaventures, and a really good Charleston team, at least for DFS purposes. So I don't hate the idea of using him here, and I think he could do well against this Arizona team and thrive in a faster paced matchup. But the second we kind of buy in there, we're going to see that Elijah Martin explosion game. And he's been pretty in this 4-game stretch. He does have a 29, but 16, 23, and 10 fantasy points. So you're really seeing while Davis is nuking, Martin's not. It's just a very big rarity for them both to do so. I think it makes a lot of sense to get some Martin shares in GPP because I think most people would gravitate towards Davis if they are using anyone in this game. But I think ultimately both probably come in under 30%. So you have your kind of free reign there. My man Vladislav Golden, who has been a fantasy point per minute monster, just never going to play big minutes. It's tough because he's stuck at this 20 to 25 minute mark, whether that's conditioning fouls or the fact that they're going to continue to play Giancarlo Rosado about 15 to 18 minutes, which just comes directly out of Golden's total because they're generally not going to play at the same time. And Rosado's another guy that can contribute at a fantasy point per minute number ungodly. Like at 4.9, if we were to say that, Golden's out, he's not, but say he was out, Rosado's going to play 30 minutes, he would be the craziest play on the slate and probably put up like 35 plus fantasy points. But alas, they're splitting that time and it makes both of them relatively mediocre plays overall. Generally, if you're looking for somebody here and you want to discount, you have Weatherspoon sitting there at 4.7. He hasn't really looked particularly great recently. Brian Greenlee sits there at 5.3, has had some nice games, can score a little bit, chucks threes. And then you have Nick Boyd sitting there at 6.5, who did make his triumphant return after missing nearly a month of the season with a leg issue against St. Bonaventures, jumped right into 20 minutes. Wasn't really all that good, but at 5.5, it's a price point that I'm interested in. We did see him heavily involved to start the season, and he is a big part of their rotation when healthy. So I guess Boyd would be the guy that I'd look at the most here in this spot. But the potential for a track meet does worry me with him. I don't know that his conditioning is going to be right just yet. On the Arizona side, Caleb Love at 9K. I'm not saying he's an easy fade because he's not good. He's obviously really good, but he's a really easy fade to me because I am going to be respecting FAU defense. In fact, I've mostly faded guys against FAU most of the time they're on the slate. And it hasn't really hurt me. Even in the games that they're scoring these 90 plus, like they're not there's not guys breaking the slate against them majority of the time. So it hasn't really hurt me. Like obviously the Terry Shannon game against them where he put up 33 and Marcus Domask, like they had monster second halves. That one did. But in the first half, it looked like it was a good fade. And generally, I'm not going to be stacking against FAU anytime. And I'm certainly probably not looking to pay 9K for Caleb Love coming off a fairly mediocre game last time. So that does worry me. Kashad Johnson at almost 7.8. That also worries me, paying a near 8K price tag for him. I don't think the rebounding opportunities will be there for him. We saw against Alabama in a matchup he should have cooked. He got into foul trouble. He never got into rhythm, and he just it didn't work out for him. I do like Omar Ballo in this spot. It'll be a case of between Golden and Ballo who can get who in foul trouble. Ballo's been doing a great job controlling his fouls. He's been the one just wreaking havoc. Pringle on Bama the other day. Nick Pringle, as we thought, he got into foul trouble. Heavy foul trouble trying to deal with Ballo, who was just a monster, 16 points and 12 rebounds. This is a spot where you can count on him to be very aggressive and get to the foul line a lot. I think that this newfound hack-a-Ballo thing that we were seeing against Bama might become a regular thing. And if it does, he's going to have a chance to rack up a lot of points. Anytime he's in this low 7K range, I think he has to be considered. But what it comes down to is the next tier of guys, which is Pele Larson and Kylan Boswell. Larson absolutely exploded against Alabama, 36.5 fantasy points. That has caused his price to balloon up to 6.6. That starts to get a little bit crazy for me because we know there's serious downside for him. I think we can probably safely look to other options, but he is worth taking in GBPs because he has 40 plus upside here. And especially if he's not getting into foul trouble and on the court for 30 plus minutes, he's just doing a lot, in terms of peripherals and scoring, that it's hard not to at least have some consideration for him. I still like Kylan Boswell. He's my guy, an elite 3-point shooter, great passer, really came alive in that second half against Bama, was hitting shot after shot late, got a bunch of steals, which helped his score as well. Had a couple of really mediocre games before that. Purdue, he was horrible. Wisconsin, 24. Like, generally not going to have that big upside. It took 5 steals last game for him to get there. So I think the 6.4 price is starting to get to a level where he's not an auto play for me as he was last slate, and he's not going to be the posh play of the day for this one either. We did see Jaden Bradley play some additional minutes against Bama because of the foul trouble that we saw with Johnson and Pele Larson early. The fouls in that game they were getting outrageous, but he's only 3.6. If we can get to 20 minutes there at that 3.6 price point, I do think he can do enough to pay off 3.6. And I do like him there as a value option that is probably better suited for a GBP. But if you like the rest of your lineup and you need that sub 4K look, Jaden Bradley is certainly somebody that we can look at. He's part of this rotation, is going to continue to be. And then KJ Lewis, who played 23 minutes at 4.7, has gone up 600 after a pretty solid game, 9-4-2 with 3 steals against Alabama. He's just okay as well. All right, next one here, Vanderbilt versus Memphis. Now we start to get into some games where we can mini stack or at least feel okay or good about paying up for certain guys here. The line, let me get that pulled up. It's 16.5 point spread in favor of Memphis. The total is 150. Vanderbilt with Jerry Stackhouse. Like, it's crazy to imagine that he's been there over 4 years now because it doesn't seem like it, but things maybe don't seem to be working out. These constant hockey line substitutions, this rotating transfer portal business. They've got injuries galore to keep guys. It's just it's not looking great for Vanderbilt with the way that Stackhouse runs things. And Tyron Lawrence, like, I don't know what the deal is. And I'm not a coach, so I don't get to sit here and be like, if you do this, you'll be playing better. But if you watch Vanderbilt games, and I hate having to say that because it makes me look like an armchair quarterback, but there's an effort issue for Tyron Lawrence. You don't shoot 3 for 12 and 3 for 13 if you're really out there working hard. Sure, you'll have a bad shooting night, but there's a lot of hanging the head going on here. And this Vanderbilt team they look pretty awful. You might want to consider Ezra Mannion at 6.4. That is a tasty price for him, and he is going to play a lot of minutes and generally one of the only viable options on this team with your main team lineup. But other than that, I think Vanderbilt's starting to become an avoid, and I think Memphis is going to drub them by 20 plus. Pat on the back. Last time Memphis was on the slate against Virginia, did mention, hey, if ever there's a game Malcolm Dandridge is going to do well, it's in this DVP spot against Virginia. He did have 27.5 fantasy points. It's his 3rd time in 5 games that he has eclipsed 20 fantasy points. Sitting there at 5.2. We're not going to get more than 18 to 20 minutes, so it is a pretty lean spot to use him, but I would imagine he should have no problem grabbing a ton of rebounds in this game. If we can get him some putbacks and a couple of other stats here, I think he does have an opportunity for 20 plus again at 5.2. That's going to be more than enough. Nick Jourdain at this point, just not effective in this system, has really dealt with foul issues. It doesn't quite look comfortable. He went from a Temple team where, he was at least featured at times. Now that's not happening at all. When he doesn't get the ball in his hands, it seems like he's just not really effective, and he's not rebounding all that well the last month of the season either. So I do like Dandridge more, and I think he has an opportunity to maybe wreck shop here at sub 5% ownership once again. David Jones, the decision to pay 9.2 I think it's a good idea to pay for David Jones. He is just getting to a level here that we saw him play during his DePaul days, where he began to break out, heavy usage, high shot rate. He's actually making 40% of his threes. Just a absolute hoss. Penny Hardaway is riding him hard, and this Memphis team is playing as well as they are because of David Jones and how confident he looks. 7th on the Ken Pom Player of the Year rankings, a absolute phenomenal beast. This Memphis team might actually, in this season of the Penny Hardaway era, they might be looking like a second weekend team here if they can keep this going. A questionable loss to what it's going to turn out to be a bad Villanova team, and they lost a close one to Ole Miss. But ever since the OT win over VCU, they've just been really riding high. Wins over Texas A&M, Clemson, and Virginia. Those will all stack up, and those will all hold up as better wins on the resume come March and the when the bubble thing happens if Memphis ends up falling out. But I think they do run the American and will be the team that ultimately comes out of there with the auto bid. So respect to Penny, even though he runs the hockey subs too. David Jones is somebody you can use. I know some of you are gun shy paying up right now, and it is something that has not worked as well, at least this month, but he's just been awesome. He's really worth the consideration here because the matchup is great as well. Yeah, Javon Quinterly at 7-2. It's kind of a take it or leave it price. He's either last guy in or a luxury play. I don't start my lineups with Javon Quinterly at this price, and I'm just not that excited about him. Caleb Mills at 5-1 is in play. We're not seeing any upside from him, but he is one of those guys where you don't want to dip down into the 3K range. I don't blame you. You need a little bit of value, but not too low. Caleb Mills is going to give you close to 4x at this 5-1 price point, even off the bench. And then Jaquan Walton, who has been playing 25 plus minutes in each of the last 3 games. No real upside lately, but he's only 4'9", and we know he's going to be on the floor, and he is capable. So I don't mind Jaquan Walton either if you want to go that route. But I am calling my shot once again, trying to tempt fate with a second straight game of Malcolm Dandridge. We'll see how it works out, but certainly risky. Villanova versus DePaul. Anytime DePaul is on the slate, we want to consider targeting against them heavily. We know that. DePaul is a very, very bad basketball team. They're 12.5-point dogs against a Villanova team that I have no confidence in whatsoever. Total of 135. Villanova is really interesting for this slate. On the road against DePaul, and DePaul's big dogs, just so pathetic. Villanova still has a lot of cheap guys. On the last slate, we were looking at, Hakeem Hart, Jordan Longino, Creighton. It was a tough spot. They ended up getting the win over Creighton without Justin Moore. And these guys' prices are all basically the same. Assuming Justin Moore doesn't play, as they're going to take it easy with him. Injury history. I know it's a different body part, but I would suspect he doesn't go. If he doesn't go, that is a major usage bump again to Jordan Longino and minutes bumps to Hakeem Hart and to a degree TJ Bamba. Now, GPP-wise, TJ Bamba is probably the best option on Villanova because he's coming off an absolute atrocious game in which he had 1 single fantasy point, but the minutes are still there. The role is still there for him to shoot. He's still taking shots. 6 shot attempts against Creighton, 8 against UCLA, 12 against Kansas State. Remember when he was on Wazoo, high usage guy. He's not as high usage here, which has been part of the problems. But that K-State game, he scored 30 fantasy points, hit a couple threes, had that volume, did well. He's only 4'6". So Bamba is your GPP top tier play from this team. When you're looking at your single entry and main team lineups, you want to look to in my opinion, Jordan Longino, perhaps Hakeem Hart. I do think Hakeem Hart will be relatively chalky. He does go from 4K to 5K, so it's a little bit more of a difficult price there, but we can expect 30 plus minutes without more. He has been more of a defensive stopper this year in the later part of his career. So we're not going to get a lot of scoring out of him. He's probably more at the 4X range here than he is like 5X plus. The 4K price would have been a different story. So I'm glad that went up, but Hart's definitely up top there. But for me at 5'3", 300 more, I prefer Jordan Longino. I have always liked his game. Saw the flashes early. He has a ton of upside, still relatively raw for the most part, but he's starting to come into his own. He has scored 25 plus fantasy points in 3 of those last 4 games. Role is solidified. Even if Moore comes back, there'll be less shots for him, but he's still going to be on the floor. And he's also swiping a ton of steals lately, which we can't necessarily predict, but that has been bumping his score as well. Overall, his usage and shot rates have started to eclipse 20%. And in this kind of, post Justin Moore spot, he is just a really appealing option. So he's my favorite of those cheaper Villanova guards for sure. And I'm still never using Mark Armstrong. I realize he's 3.5, but what are you actually expecting from Mark Armstrong at this point? I think I've personally seen enough. It's year 2. It's not working. I would be surprised if he didn't hit the portal after this. I think he's somebody who needs to hit the reset button and no shame in going to like the mid-major level. But there's just, no reason I think to play Mark Armstrong other than a total throwaway spot where you're getting multiple payups. And looking at the payups on this slate, they're good, but are they worth rostering Mark Armstrong? And I say that knowing that he's going to score like 40 against DePaul. So keep that in mind. Good spot to target Tyler Burton. We were on him the UCLA and K-State games at the depressed prices, looking more like the Richmond version of himself. No Justin Moore would mean more usage for Burton. Now, he only took 4 shots against Creighton, which was a little puzzling. Got to the foul line less as well, which was part of the problem, but 12 rebounds. He is owning the glass and should do so here against DePaul as well. And then the big question is at 7-4, can you roster Eric Dixon after he was 6'5" and just threw down a 50 against a Ryan Kalkbrenner-led front court of the Creighton Blue Jays? 32 real points, 4 for 10 from long range, 12 of 21 from the field. Now, Villanova, without Moore, has a definite lack of a go-to scorer, and it looks like Dixon wants to be that guy. And they had a angle there. He was unguardable against Creighton. They wrote it. He should be unguardable against DePaul. Many people are. And I think they're going to go right back to Eric Dixon and allow him to just cook. 21 shots is a tall order, but I do think somewhere between 13 to 15 is probably an inevitability. 7-4 is not that high of a price really for that type of role. And it does fill a forward slot for us without having to break the bank. So I do like Dixon as well. GPPs going to Burton and Bamba makes a lot of sense off the field in your main builds. Dixon and Longino are the 2 that I would be looking at there. DePaul, it's usually Chico Carter. He's 6'6". Now, I don't fear anyone on Villanova. So if you want to use Chico, high usage, high assist rate, you're welcome to do so. I do think the price of almost $7K is pretty much where he should be. I don't think it's advantageous at all, and it's probably not going to go much higher. But he's clearly the guy on DePaul that if you're rostering someone, you want it to be him. Deshaun Nelson hasn't really been working out. He's 5'8". The price is trying to bait you in. It's a buy low opportunity, but he's been in a buy low opportunity for weeks now. And it's not quite panning out. Will it work against Villanova? It certainly could. I think DePaul probably not in the position to win this game, but definitely cover. So if you want a betting angle there, and like I said, I'm not necessarily afraid of Villanova's defense. So I do think some of these DePaul options could be in play, but their prices aren't really cheap enough for us to be able to take advantage. Elijah Fisher, another guy playing a ton of minutes that I actually like a lot, but at 5'4", I'm kind of hamstrung there on using him. Needs to be under 5K where I can really start to consider him. You have the return of Jalen Terry, who played 14 minutes in his debut game, played only 8 against Northwestern, couldn't get going there. That was an ugly game, 46-56. He's only 4K. GPP look for sure here against this Nova team, but I don't know that he's ready for big minutes just yet. So it might be a wait-and-see opportunity with Jalen Terry for now at least. Did see 28 minutes from KT Ramey in the game against Northwestern. Guard forward eligibility, has scored double-digit fantasy points in each of his last 2 games at 4-2. KT Ramey is at least somewhat interesting. And then the last game on the slate, St. John's versus UConn. UConn coming off a tough loss, a surprising loss, most definitely. Did not see that coming. Now, there are 10.5-point favorites against St. John's. The total is 147.5. I think the over is I won't say lock, but that is a very optimal plus EV, whatever you want to call it, spot there with that number. I think they sail over 160 personally. UConn may be without Donovan Clingan, which is a very big deal, dealing with an ankle issue. And I posted something in the Discord earlier from one of the beats saying that it seemed really unlikely at that moment. And at that moment, it was like 2-3 in the afternoon, West Coast time, that he would go. So that's a huge deal because Joel Soriano's on the other side there, wringing his hands, licking his chops, ready to go. He would have Samson Johnson on him, who does not have the versatility to keep up with Soriano. He has the physicality, but won't he just foul out against Soriano? The answer is yes. 20 minutes for Samson Johnson means Soriano's going to absolutely just dirtbag UConn like he did in their last game. So that's a good thing for Soriano. Obviously don't want to root for a kid to be hurt, but right now it looks like Clingan is likely not going to play. If he didn't play, expect Samson Johnson to slide into the starting lineup there. Decision to be made without Clingan because Tristan Newton will certainly, the game changes a lot, and Newton is going to take a lot more shots without Clingan. They won't have a low post presence to really feature there. Maybe we see one of Newton's spike games. His prices has been dropping as he got almost to 11K there before Gonzaga game. He's been kind of in that low 20s range. He's generally not somebody I want to pay up over 9K for, but that does change my mind if Clingan's not a go because he's just going to handle a lot of that offense. Different positions, I realize, but that usage will just go funneling towards him. Cam Spencer at 7.3 and Alex Caravan at 7.1 are both priced where they should be. Not a ton of consistent upside. They definitely have it, but they're kind of middling plays. I do think St. John's, defensively is a advantageous spot for both Spencer and Caravan. So if you have a read on one of those guys, certainly can do so. And then value-wise, you still have Solo Ball starting. He's down there at 3.5. He's not going to have a very high usage, not going to take a lot of shots. He's just out there defending and filling that fifth Beto role. So not really interested in him even at that 3.5 price. I am starting to get really antsy about Stephen Castle. Since returning 10, 18, 19, and 20 minutes. Technically going up 1 minute each time. So he's going to get 21 minutes here against St. John's, possibly. He had the 22 against Pine Bluff, but Gonzaga game, nothing doing, and then pretty much nothing against the Hall as well. But 5.5 against St. John's. This is a NBA player. Big start to the season, granted against Northern Arizona and Stonehill, but this is a guy that at 5.5, that's going to be a tough one for me not to want to use. And that's partially because I want to be early on a guy, but also there's just way too much talent there. If he slides in the starting lineup, it's a no-brainer, right? But it is the last game on the slate. It's significantly later than most of the other games, and you're not going to have that idea of how you're going to go yet. So it is recommended you have at least 2 players in this game just so you can have some flexibility to decide on what to do. And it's just a good game from a DFS perspective either way. UConn's going to be looking to, rectify their last loss. St. John's trying to find their way, but they've got some really interesting pieces and talented pieces. This is just a game you want exposure to. So you can do some things here depending on the rest of your build. And then Hassan Diarra, who's playing roughly 20 minutes, not very exciting, but he is 4K. He is going to be chucking typically when he's out there, but a very low-end value option at that. And then on the St. John's side, Joel Soriano at 10.1. It might be tough to pay that price. You will have to probably sacrifice David Jones if you do play Soriano, just because value-wise, I'm not super comfortable here playing a bunch of sub 4K, 5K guys. I think it's a little bit too risky. And I want to do what we kind of did on the last few slates, and that's really live in that 6K to 8K range as much as we can. But I love Soriano, and fading him is certainly tough. A lot of that decision will do with Clingan. So if you need to leave that salary available to decide, If we get the announcement that Kling is not playing, my tune changes quickly, and I think Soriano becomes the best overall pay up on the slate. But 5 p.m. compared to the last game at 1 p.m. Pacific time, that's a really tough choice you're going to have to make. Chris Ledlam at 7-2. Gotta like him here. He is a very high volume guy. Kind of walks around thinking that he's the star of the team. It's annoying for me at times, but it's also kind of commendable that he operates that way. He rebounds at a high rate. He racks up stocks. He's just all over the ball. 7-2 is a fair and reasonable price for him. Guard forward eligibility, definitely on board with using him if you want. Dennis Jenkins was super chalk against Xavier. Didn't pan out, ended up fouling out in 22 minutes. Look for a bounce back spot from him here, but I am worried about him getting a little bit handcuffed against that UConn perimeter D to an extent. So I'm personally not there on Jenkins, but I know there will be some looking for a bounce back from him, and he's clearly one of the alphas on this team, right? They are starting to get more out of Jordan Dingle, at least offensively. It hasn't really translated into DFS production just yet, but he is shooting a lot more, and they are looking to get him extra minutes. And that is coming at the behest of Dennis Jenkins. So there's a little bit of splitting going on there, which is kind of hurting the upside of both. Dingle's only 5'4", though, and I think he makes sense as an interesting GPP-like play. When he was at Penn, he was an unstoppable, abominable offensive force. We haven't seen that just yet in St. John's. There is going to be a game explodes to remind people just how good he is. Looking at his shot attempts, 12, 11, 15, 5, and 12 over the last 5 games. I believe that offensive explosion is coming. Why not here against UConn in a big, big spot for St. John's? Glenn Taylor starting. He's probably the best value or one of the best values on the slate, 4-4. You got a forward there. He put up 21.5 fantasy points against Xavier, played 35 minutes. A lot of the foul issues for other guys ended up allowing Taylor to play those additional minutes, but it is the third time in 5 games that he has played 30 or more minutes. So at this point, I'm not thinking really hard about it because I ended up overthinking using him on that last slate. He was like 15% owned. I know it took a little bit of love there to get him over the 20 fantasy point mark, but 35 minutes for Glenn Taylor at 4-4. I don't care who he's playing. That's one of the spots where I don't worry as much about DVP because at least I know Glenn Taylor is a decent enough basketball player to pay this price off, as opposed to some of those other low usage guys that are at these prices that we're maybe hoping to work out, but may actually end up doing what Jamie Kaiser did tonight and delivering a bagel, which is not what I ordered, Jamie Kaiser. Didn't order the Kaiser bagel. Naheem Aline, 4-1, another solid value. He also benefited a great deal from that Jenkins foul trouble, played 33 minutes against Xavier. Typically not going to see that from Naheem Aline. I won't be chasing him there at 4-1. I'd rather just play Glenn Taylor because it does fill a forward spot, and at least I know as a relatively consistent starter minutes coming his way. I don't know that for Aline. At 4-1, he's fine, but if we get an inkling that he's going to be rostered by the masses, then I think he makes more sense as a relative fade. So that pretty much is the slate. Core-wise, and this is a really difficult slate to sit here and be like, here are 3 plays that we are absolutely in love with. Let's score them. Here's a posh play of the day. I'm sorry to report there is no posh play of the day on this slate. I got to protect my record. We had the kid earlier today. Was it Lance that came through for us? But I'm looking at this slate and thinking that it's going to end up being relatively tough, which is a good thing. We like lower scoring slates. We've been having some high scoring slates lately, and I wouldn't mind a little 190, 210 action winning some GPPs on this one. But as it stands right now, there are 3 players that are going to be sliding into my lineup, and it may surprise you. Number 1 from Villanova at 5.3K, Jordan Longino. I don't know. I feel like I'm married to this play. I haven't really used him all that much this season, but I continue to comment about him, watch his game. Villanova games are kind of painful to watch sometimes, but I usually come away feeling really confident about the way this kid plays. And he is getting more confident. You can tell by the way he's carrying himself and what he's able to do. So minus Justin Moore, Jordan Longino is core play number 1. Next on the list here is going to be the somewhat pricier Desmond Cloud. Again, I think that somebody in the Xavier trio is a must roster. Olivari being scoring dependent, McKnight being more of a facilitator, it just makes more sense for us to roster Dez. They're all priced similarly, so that is where I'm going to go with Dez Cloud as core play number 2. And then the third look here, going back to the forward spot and another 7 to 8K range player, going to the Providence versus Butler game and taking a player that could be potentially a posh play because I don't think he's going to be that rostered, but I'm not tagging him with that designation just in case he's not quite there yet. But Josh Oduro at 7-3 against Butler. I think he does deliver a pretty solid like 33, 34 fantasy point game. Not going to give us a 50 by any means, but enough to pay off here. And looking at that Butler front court, I think he just ends up mowing them down. The one thing that could unravel for him is if he gets into foul trouble, of course. That wouldn't be great, but I do think Oduro has a nice one here against Butler. That core is subject to change by the morning after I've had some more time to soak this slate up. But as of now, those are the 3 guys we're going to roll with. All right, let's do some prize picks here. The fantasy score for PrizePicks, we mentioned this on the CFB show the other night. They generally don't come out until the day of the slate. So the night before, we're just not getting that. But we do have a PRA number here that is interesting for Chris Ledlum. 19.5 points, rebounds, and assists. I know it's UConn, but I do like the over, especially true if Klingon can't go. I think Ledlum ends up easily hitting 20 plus of some combination of those 3 stats. The Ole Miss group, they got Brandon Murray back. They've got several other players. There's a bit of a logjam at guard. I took the under on Jalen Murray's points the other night, and he ended up beating it by like 1. Going back to the unders on this one, it's 15.5 points against Southern Miss. Just the fact that Flanny's there, Morell's there, Breakfield's been doing well. Then you insert Brandon Murray, who's still finding his footing there. It just seems like Jalen Murray's going to end up getting lost in the shuffle and further down the pecking order. So 15.5 points to me, even in a good matchup like this, seems like it's a little bit too high. I'm going to take the under 15.5 there on Jalen Murray. Just for reference, they have Flanagan at 15.5, Matthew Morell at 16.5, and Jermaine Breakfield at 9.5. So all bunched up there. But like I said, adding Murray to the mix, got to watch out. And then how about my man Ray Battle for West Virginia, making his debut the other night. Now, West Virginia lost in a game that we made a little bit of money betting Radford. They were, I believe, was it +7, +8, 66-65 lost to Radford on the home floor. Now they're playing Toledo, who is Ray J. Dennis-less. Of course, he's at Baylor. But Raekwon Battle in game number 1, usage rate, this is not a misprint, 46%. 14 2-point field goals, 8 3-point field goals. He took 13 free throws. Basically, every time Ray touched the ball, he made a shot attempt or a free throw attempt on a very high number of those possessions. 29 real points, 6 rebounds even for good measure. Kirk Creaser 6 times. Now, Kirk Creaser played 37 minutes. He's not taking hardly any shots. He took 4 in that one, but he knows Ray Battle, get him the rock. Noah Farrakhan came in there. He scored 16 points. Like, all of a sudden, this West Virginia team's interesting from a DFS perspective. Now, they lost Jesse Edwards for a month with an injury, which means they have to play a lot of Quinn Selinsky at the 5 minutes. But Cook did come back, play 23 minutes, and is healthy now with 7 rebounds in their last game. So they're starting to get healthy. They're starting to get their guys. This whole long-winded thing to say that Ray Battle's PRA is at 24.5. Now, his points prop is at 19, which is pretty high in its own right. I do think he hits like 20 points, but we want that little bit of extra there in 24.5. We'll see what his fantasy score total, if they give us one tomorrow, is. But anything under 30 fantasy points as their total is just an easy over for Ray Battle. I only needed to see one game. I know what he's all about. I've been watching this kid since he was in high school. When he was on the Huskies, I always rooted for him, always talked him up. He couldn't really get adjusted to the system. Montana State becomes an absolute household name for CBB grinders. And now looking at game number 1 in West Virginia, he has the green light to chuck. Easily going to be taking a lot of Ray Battle props this year. So over 24.5 points, rebounds, and assists for our guy, Ray Quan Battle, who is pretty much him and the Attorney General of West VA, directly responsible for forcing the NCAA's hand on allowing 2-time non-grad transfers the ability to play this season. So kudos for that, Ray. Kudos for that. And let's look at some DK props since we're making such good time here. That 24.5 PRA sits on DK at minus 125, by the way. I obviously will be hitting that over there as well. Let's take a look at the Alamir Dawes points. They're 14.5. Like I said, I took the under 13.5 the other night. He hit 11. It's minus 125 at 14.5 to hit the under. It's against Xavier. It's a spot he could actually do well in. But I do feel like taking the under on Alamir Dawes is going to be more profitable more often than not. So I am taking the under there. Not often that I take unders. I only do it when I feel very passionately about a certain play, and under 14.5 on Alamir Dawes is definitely one of the top props of the day for me. And then I like Chris Ledlam, over 11.5 real points, minus 105 there against UConn. That is one that just seems favorable. Dennis Jenkins is at 10.5 points as well. That's worth a little sprinkle on the over at minus 110, even against the tougher UConn defense, just because there's going to be volume there. All right. Nice, easy, and efficient. That'll wrap it up. I think we're good to stop there. We'll be back Monday night for the CBB edition of the show. Next week is going to be absolutely crazy. And I know Monday's Christmas time, but it'll be the evening. All the Christmas festivities will be over for me. You guys can maybe, tune in there after opening some presents, eating some Cornish game hen, or whatever it is you do on that day. And then come talk to me and hang out for some CBB action as we talk about the Tuesday slate. Then we'll be back Tuesday night to talk about the Wednesday slate. So basically, you're going to get the CBB Super Show next week, Monday, Tuesday, Friday, CFB version of the show on Thursday. And we are going to be doing a lot of betting content on every bowl game next week. Yes, that's every single bowl game. We'll have a betting article dedicated to it. There will be slate breakdowns for each and every CFB and CBB slate as well. Lots and lots heading into the new year of 2024. Let's get those green screens. Let's take those trips to the window. Continue to grind with me, and we will be profitable heading into March. Let's do it. Appreciate you guys. Continue to support the show, and I'll see you next time on the Super Show.